And this is for the team and the team alone. And that's kind of like general feedback on what how the team's working and how we make that better. So this picture on the right hand side is a template from Mural itself. So they really support this kind of work. And you can kind of see these columns that are listed out here already, right? So as a team, you talk about what went well and what didn't go well. And then as you go through those as a team, looking at each one of the things that people have written down, you then create actions, which you can kind of assign to team members. And maybe these are things as simple as, we need to spend more time socializing. We've lost the fun, which is definitely something that happens in remote working scenarios. I've seen management individuals step away from these sessions to allow team members to have a safer space to reflect in, which is always quite nice. But ultimately, a lot of the actions that come out of it are things that someone's got to take to that management individual. So there's benefits and negatives to that person stepping away. I've also seen this exercise with the framework of stop, start, and continue. And the reason why I don't like that framework is when you start saying, I want you to stop doing something, it immediately becomes quite, targeted and confrontational, which isn't necessarily the way that everyone likes to deal with their problems. So personally, I think what went well, what didn't go well, is a bit more kind of even and fair. So as I kind of mentioned earlier on, casual collaboration is harder. What I mean by that is this kind of thing, right? So just tapping your colleague on the shoulder and asking them what's going, asking someone for an opinion. These things are much more complicated because now I've got to book in a meeting with someone to do these things, which leads us to the problem of now suddenly everyone's calendars are just completely chock-a-block with meetings because that's the only way to find collaboration time. So the way that we've made this work for us is those design thinking sessions that we were talking about, because they kind of have to take longer and they are more complicated to run because of technical issues and people finding time in their calendars and stuff like that. We generally now got ourselves into the practice of basically setting each other homework. So you have a setup session, which would be quite short, going, here's the mural that I want you to work in, here's the exercise that I want you to do, and that person could even prep a whole bunch of artifacts to work with in that mural. And then you kind of go, right, next week, tomorrow, in a couple of days, whatever it might be, we'll come back together and discuss the work that we've done. And then in between the two, team members can find time in their calendars and their own diaries to actually conduct that exercise. So it kind of makes those design thinking sessions, in a way, it makes them take longer, but it makes them more flexible to accommodate for these kind of like difficult working times. And when everyone gets back together again, we simply play back the work that we've done to share that working session, to share that knowledge across the team. So I use the word playbacks there, and I just want to talk about those a little bit. There are two different flavors of playback. One is lowercase p, and one is capital P. So the lowercase p is the informal playbacks that you give within teams. These shouldn't need any preparation, anything like that. You can simply give people an update on the work you're doing straight out of the working document, because you don't want to have the time suck of putting time and effort into prepping anything for those kinds of sessions. And everyone in the team should be aware of that, and there's no pressure to prep anything, because otherwise you get more problems with people spending time preparing things and not designing things. The capital P are the more formal playbacks. So these are situations where you're pitching to executives or external stakeholders, whoever it might be. And essentially the job of this session is to get buy-in from those people, telling them why it's really important that we spend the extra time, money, and effort creating this experience because of the value that it brings to our users. And the best way of doing that is in stories, because stories are far more compelling than a boring functional presentation, kind of like we saw before with Dirt Bicycle. So what makes a good story? Well, a whole bunch of different stuff, right? But personally, I believe it's all about people, and it's those characters that are so important, going back to that user-centered way of designing. And these stories can take multiple different formats. I've seen people giving full-blown kind of done videos. I've also seen people clicking through a keynote. The kind of format I don't think matters too much. It's the story that's the bit that's important. I have once delivered a playback which was in the form of like a children's story. It was all in rhyming couplets. I kind of went slightly insane while I was doing that particular rhyming couplets thing. The last thing I want to share with you is an example of one of these capital P playbacks, and I really like it because I think it's an excellent example of the kind of outcome that can come from design thinking, from a user-centered way of thinking. This particular playback is about Google, about the search engine. So if we were looking at it from the engineer's perspective, the description of it would be, you put box and it goes through the internet to try and find you relevant websites that match the search query that you came up with. It's quite dry. It's not the most exciting story in the world. But with this video, that I'm hoping if I click here, it's just going to start playing, you kind of see how bringing those users and that story in makes a much more emotional connection. And suddenly something as dry and boring as a search engine becomes a real powerful tool that helps everyday people in their lives. So yeah, hopefully you can see how we take that kind of thinking and apply it to the bicycles we had at the start of this talk. That your bicycle, which if you leave it to someone like my dad to describe, is a method of travel. It's two wheels and a seat, can become a tool of liberation. It can become the thing that allows a single mum to get her kids to school in the morning. It can be the tool that helps to educate the poorest working classes. And that story is so much more compelling than two wheels and a seat. And to me, that's a thinking. Thank you very much for your time. I'm going to escape out of this and see if we've got any questions in the chat.
Hi, Tom. Thank you very much for that. It's a perfect timing, I have to say. I was very impressed with that.
I have been practicing.
Hang on, where's the chat gone? We not so much a question. We did get a comment from Diane, which I now can't see. But she was talking about the designing in 4 dimensions, including a time factor, a time element. I believe she's an architect. I don't know if you had any comment on that, or whether you feel time is automatically included in.
So we've developed different ways to communicate remotely in architectural design. So we needed to communicate in the 4th dimension time. I'm not too sure how to comment on that. So yeah.
Because I guess from what you say, you're using something like Mural in your initial design phase, and then you're using your GitHub and your little card things to take your project through its process. So I think that's the time element comes into your little virtual card system, I would imagine.
Right. Yes. And that aspect of it, I kind of didn't want to get into the weeds on it too much here, but those tasks would have units assigned to them, which isn't an indication of time, but more an indication of effort, as it were. And so therefore, it helps to communicate why how much work that a team can get done in a time period and things like that. It can be super useful, especially when you've got all these kind of external pressures and things. Because I don't know if you might have heard my daughter in the background there, but certainly working at home can be much more distracting than working in the office.
Yeah.
It's a handy tool. It's almost like I set it on.
That wasn't a recording that you just played to hammer home a point.
Yes.